Irish, African Americans, and French Huguenots arrived and began settling along this area. And all the documented history points to the same fact, as was mentioned earlier. It was a fairly rugged land. It was tough to navigate through, and the Cape Fear River provided an opportunity for navigation up and down quite easily. Also, as we talked about earlier, the Cape Fear River, the reason why this was an early area of settlement was the ease of access and transportation. The naval stores, I'm quite sure if the Yankees in a room like me, I had no idea what a naval store was either. So I found this definition of a naval store, and it's very basic. At the end, it's really basically products derived from pine sap. But the definition that I had here, which kind of sums it up pretty well, naval stores is a broad term which originally applied to resin-based components used in building and maintaining wooden sailing ships. Category which includes cordage, mast, turpentine, rosin, pitch, and tar. So that was the original product, and then you kind of fast forward into what those products were carried on, and there's some really neat history now at the time of the river landing. So I wanted to go ahead and find out, I had heard, this was one area my salesman was right, I had heard why river landing was called river landing, but I wanted to document it and read it for sure in history. John McGeechee from North Carolina State University has probably the best written documentation in terms of the river and what we call the landings on the river. As he recalls it, access points along the river, back in those days when rafts would use the river to transport their goods, access points along the river were called, literally, quote-unquote, river landings. To avoid, when these folks would be on these rafts going up and down the river, to avoid being washed, driven back upriver by the rising tides, the raftsmen would tie their vessels up in these landing areas. And then when the tide headed back out, they'd untie them, and off they would go on the rafts back down towards Wilmington. Conversely, if they were coming upstream, when the tide was rising, they'd get on the rafts and sail. When the tide was going out, they'd tie them up. So that's really the history behind the name River Landings. And also, a couple interesting facts here about some of those vessels, and I think y'all will tie this pretty well. The primary vessels back in that time they used to transport the trades and the cargo were periaugers, which is made of cypress, which is a very expensive material. There's been several of them found up and down the Cape Fear River. They also sailed on flax rafts and later paddle wheel boats to get their goods back and forth. The raftsmen, there's some really interesting story about the raftsmen. I found it interesting because these are people that literally inhabited this land. They would use the rafts to go up and down the river, transporting their goods, and many of the documented history would talk about when they sailed into these landings and how they would spend time up in the local area. So these are literally people that were called this place home before we called it home. An interesting rendition, though, from Mr. McGahee around what these raftsmen were. At the time, the raftsmen were considered they were very low paid. It was not considered to be an honorable or high ranking job. He said the raftsmen were often slaves, landless freedmen, indentured servants, or, and this is my favorite part, sometimes we all feel like this, other unfortunates possessed of strong limbs and no better opportunity.
Marines.
That's who lived here before we did. And Pond Landing, interestingly enough, Pond Landing, which is an area that today we refer to on the maps, many of y'all probably don't even know what we call Pond Landing. If you're standing on the 9th tee box on a river course and you look down the fairway, all the woods to your left-hand side is referred to as Pond Landing. It's a beautiful parcel of land. There's about 2.5 to 3 acres of buildable land there, which we're considering some very interesting projects for. But that area is called Pond Landing. And a while back, I said, gosh, guys, I can't stand the name pond. And to me, ponds don't elicit. Lakes are beautiful. Ponds are just mosquito infestation. So I said, I can't stand the name. They said, no, there's a lot of history to it. So the history is Pond Landing, and it's an area right down below that, is one of the earliest recorded access points or landings on the nautical maps of those days. So if you stand on the tee box on number 8 and look to your left, or if you stand on the green on number 7, or if you're like me, we've been on the river a few times down around number 7 on the left, down there's actually some great artifacts down I'll talk about in a moment. But that's the area that you can also, if you're standing on that 7th green and you look downriver towards the Parks House or the AT, that area down there is what is referred to as Pond Landing. So a very, very historical site and a lot of significance to our name here. I was told 7:15, so I'm going to wrap up here with just a few quick facts. A few little-known facts about river landing that I came across. Some of the remnants of the original rafts used back in that time, back in the mid-1700s, can be found on the banks of the river. If you stand on the green on number 7 and look to your left down in the water, if the river's down low enough, you can see remnants of some of the original rafts. And what we don't know, though, and I've just not been able to confirm, I've heard different stories, we don't know if those are actually cypress rafts or if they're just a general rafts. Some of the rafts in the day they talked about being 30 by 50. So those are enormous rafts if you think about it. And they were tied together, they're constructed differently, so we really need one day to get down and find out what type of raft this is. But it is a raft that way back when, in the early days of river landing, I understand that raft was in the middle of the river, that it had sunk, and early on they took that artifact, pulled it up on the shore for people to see. So next time you're looking for your ball left side of number 7, look on down there, and if you see a bunch of fairly good-sized wood pylons together, that is one of the old original rafts that was used in the trade in those days. So great fact for us. Talked about I-40 a few minutes ago. I don't think river landing would be if it wasn't for I-40. I think like most of you, we came down here, we were driving down 95, jumped off on 40, and came by and saw a billboard and pulled on in. So if 40 wasn't here, river landing wouldn't be here. Some of the old-timers in the area say before the road went in. I said, what is that thing? They said 40. I said, how long ago was that? 40, the final portion of 40 that connected Raleigh to Wilmington went in, and it was opened up on June 29th, 1990. Before that, it was 41, 11, those are the access points and getting around, which certainly made our area a little bit more difficult to get to. The shed at the entrance of river landing. You guys have probably all driven by and seen that shed. People probably asked you what it is, and I had absolutely no idea what that shed was there for. It sort of looks out of place until you understand what it is. That shed is one of the original artifacts from this land. That is one of the only remaining things that was originally from this land. The early pictures, which we actually have one of somewhere here. The early picture shows this shed being really broken down and broken apart quite significantly. We restored it, put it back together, back to its original condition. The belief is that that was an outbuilding used on this land, and it was most likely used as a smokehouse. So if anyone asks you going forward, you know it's a smokehouse. The other thing, there has been several celebrities over the years that have come to river landing, and many of them that continue to come back to river landing. Just to name a few of them, M.L. Carr. If you're a basketball fan, you remember back in the 80s, the great days of the Boston Celtics, remember M.L. Carr waving a white towel? I mean, that's one of the great pictures of M.L. Carr. This was his home. Walsh was his home. Still is a friend of many folks out here and comes back by on a fairly regular basis. Not only did he have a great career with the Boston Celtics, he's also part owner of the Charlotte Bobcats, so very successful, very gracious man that called this area home. Robert Galmez, it was one of the very first years that we hosted the U.S. Open qualifier here. Robert Galmez, who has been a very good PGA Tour player for a number of years, won a number of tournaments, was out here and played. And Larry, were you here back then?
He didn't enjoy it. There were 7 men playing for 6 spots, and he doubled the first foursome. There were number 17, there were 2 pars and 2 bogeys. And I said, those guys are going to play to see who goes home. Gomez was in the threesome. He double bogeyed the hole.
Sure did. And the double bogey he made on that hole. Now, he went on that day, and I don't remember, it was a 66 or 67 for playing off. I mean, we're not talking about 75. These were great scores. They lit it up that day, and they were playing off, and they went to number 17, the par 3 in the river course. And what even made that double bogey worse is Gomez basically chunked his first shot into the first sand trap. Just hit it fat and dropped it into the sand trap.
You're not supposed to do
You
that?
can get away with it. He could. He had a cover. So then he gets up in a sand shot, and he proceeds to blade his sand shot. Goes all the way to the back of the green. He walks up behind it, putts it, walks up, putts it again. Double bogey. He needs a 1 guy out of 7 that's going home and slamming his trunk. And he was a great PGA Tour player. Great guy to watch. Took less than a second over every putt, but he made everything in sight. It was really cool watching him. Along with that, Bobby Clampett, for those that watch TV, golf on TV, Bobby Clampett was a real good player, is a great commentator, has been out and played the Open qualifier many, many times with us. There was a great story about him on number 9. And I don't know what his score was, but I understand it was a triple or a quad. Kept on dumping the ball into the ravine, and after that, slammed his club and got his car and drove off. So, great story about Clampett. And also, you may or may not have seen him, Michael Jordan. It is, in fact, true that Michael Jordan grew up in this area. He spent a lot of time in Teachee, around this area, and at the park downtown, Clement Street Park. There's a basketball court which is now unfortunately used as a parking lot because it's probably a historical site as much as anything else. That's where Michael Jordan played a lot of his childhood basketball. And then they spent some time here and moved on to Wilmington. You probably know the story about his father being killed on the roadside. His dad is actually buried just off of 41. I think it's on Clark Baptist Road, at a little church just off of 41. So their family history runs very deep here. Finally, a couple little facts about the golf course that I think are pretty cool facts that you may or may not know. The waterfall that currently sits at number 18, the one that we're trying to actually get to pump water again now, the waterfall in 18 is not the original waterfall. The original waterfall was put up, a big storm came and blew it out. And they had to go back and rebuild and do it again. The original layout for also the same hole, our signature hole, number 18 on the river course, this was back before Hurricane Floyd. The course looked quite a bit different back then, and one thing that was a significant difference, when you looked over the lake towards the green, there was a huge sand trap right beyond the bulkhead down there. That sand trap is no longer, it's only grass right now, but that added a whole different level to that hole. Made it a lot tougher than it is today. On the number 8 course, the number 8 hole in the river course also, probably the toughest 350-yard hole that there is, I think. But prior to Hurricane Floyd also, as you got down to the corner and looked towards the green, there used to be a whole bunch of trees down there. You can look down and see stumps down there now. Those stumps were full-grown trees. So at that time, you get down there and you look across, you hit a great shot at the middle of the fairway and look across and say, where do I go? Up or over or around? It was real tough. So next time you're down there, you can see the stumps. It wasn't only until a few years ago that area all got cleared out. And Steve and his guys now maintain it, so you can actually go play a ball out of it. After they removed the trees, it was all hay and swampy, and they've done a great job bringing that area back. Current number 14, hole right over here, one of the cooler holes, I think, now at River Landing. That hole was